Maroon by Taylor Swift. Today I'm looking at track 2 from Taylor's Midnights album from 2022, a track called Maroon. Now, this is not one of Taylor Swift's most lyrically complex songs. In fact, that's true of much of the Midnights album, I think. There's much more repetition, much fewer lyrics in this song and many other songs on the album than you often find in her songs. Nevertheless, this song is somewhat intriguing. It's quite difficult to fathom what exactly it's talking about, what kind of relationship it's talking about. So we'll see what we can pick up from that as we go through the song. Now, once again, I'm not talking about what particular person, what specific person this song might be about, but rather what kind of relationship she's describing here. Before I do that, though, before we dive into the song, I'd just like to say a few words about the word maroon itself, the colour maroon. Now, if you're from some parts of Australia, particularly from here in Queensland, you probably want to say maroon instead of maroon. But I'm going to go with the Merriam-Webster dictionary, the American dictionary, and also the Oxford English dictionary, actually, and say maroon. It derives from the French word for chestnut. So it's a deep reddish-brown colour. What are some of the things that this colour maroon stands for? Well, I did a little bit of a ChatGPT check and looked at a few other sites, and this is what I came up with. The first is sophistication. Maroon exudes a sense of refinement and luxury. The second characteristic of maroon is strength. It has deep, kind of grounding tones. The third is warmth. It's a rich, warm colour, sort of hinting at coziness. And the fourth one is passion. It has an intensity that can suggest energy and vitality. A number of things come to mind when I think of maroon. I guess one is a deep wine red colour, sunset skies, autumn. At least autumn as it's experienced in places in the world where we actually have those seasonal characteristics, which we don't here in far north Queensland. So those are some of the associations with the colour maroon. And I'm sure that Taylor had many of these in mind as she wrote this song. And obviously it also relates back to the red in her Red album. So this is a theme that runs through Taylor's songs. And it's clearly a colour that means a lot to her. It carries a lot of meaning. It carries a lot of feeling with it as well. So let's take a look at the song, the lyric video for Maroon.
When the morning came, we were cleaning incense off your vinyl shelf, 'cause we lost track of time again.
First of all, that song has that very synth feel, very characteristic of this album. That's pretty much all you can hear here, I think, is synths, apart from her vocals, of course, when they come in. It's a bit hard to see the lyrics on the screen, so I'll just read them out to you. When the morning came, we're clearing incense off your vinyl shelf, 'cause we lost track of time again. This is Taylor again, jumping straight into the middle of a story. Storytelling at its best. There's no once upon a time here. It's just when the morning came, we jump right into the middle of a story. This suggests all of these events that have gone before this. We're jumping right into the middle of something. I love the way she does that. It gets your mind working straight away. You immediately start thinking about what's going on here. What is this scene? When the morning came, we were cleaning the incense off your vinyl shelf because we lost track of time again. So they're in an apartment. Maybe they've been up all night. Incense. These are all just little images, little flashes, little spotlights on the things that are going on in the scene of this song.
off your vinyl shelf, 'cause we lost track of time again. Laughing with my feet in your lap, like you were my closest friend.
I've just brought the lyrics up on my phone because they are very difficult to see on the screen, which is kind of unusual for Taylor. So, laughing with my feet in your lap, like you were my closest friend. She's describing a very intimate scene here, and that's one of the things that makes this song really intriguing for me. What is this relationship? She says, like you were my closest friend, as if the person isn't their closest friend. It's a strange way of putting it, because she's immediately suggesting this intimacy, but also suggesting that there's something kind of mysterious or unknown about this relationship, that they find it difficult to define. We don't know at the moment whether this is a man and a woman that we're talking about, two men, two women, we just don't know. I suppose we make the assumption that the narrator is a woman, assuming that it's Taylor, and for the moment I'll go along with that, but we don't really know. But assuming that it is a woman, she's describing this scene with her feet in the lap of another person, and that strikes me as a very intimate pose to be in, whether it's with a man or a woman, even a close friend, to have your feet in their lap. It sort of brings up an image of the other person maybe massaging their feet and so on. It does indeed, I think, speak of intimacy, but there's that element of uncertainty, isn't there? Like you were my closest friend.
Laughing with my feet in your lap, like you were my closest friend. How'd we end up on the floor anyway, you say? Your roommate's cheap ass screw top rosé, that's how.
So the implication is that there's been a lot of drinking going on. They weren't always alone wherever they are at the moment in this apartment. Perhaps they are now. Get the sense that they're alone. But there's been some drinking. How did we end up on the floor? You say. By putting the other person in the second person, she's kind of placing the listener in that position. She could have said, how do we end up on the floor anyway? He said, or she said, which would have meant that me as the listener or the viewer of this scene were looking on at two people. But instead what she says is, how do we end up on the floor anyway? You say. So there are only two people in this interaction now. There's her, the narrator, and the person she's talking to, who also happens to be the person listening to this song, watching this show in their mind. That's very interesting. She makes the listener part of the song. And also she uses you rather than he or she because I think she's purposely hiding the gender of the person involved. You is gender neutral, and I think that's quite deliberate. And she's continuing to build this picture. You get the feeling there's been a party, it's been going all night, now it's morning, they've lost track of time, maybe lost a few things in their memory, and somehow they've ended up on the floor. I get the image of the other person maybe sitting on the floor with their back against the couch, and the narrator lying back on the floor with her feet in this other person's lap, and they're laughing and joking. How did we get here? But there's something in the how did we end up on the floor anyway that also adds to the mystery and ambiguity of this relationship. It's as if we're best friends, but we don't quite understand how we got here. We don't quite understand how we got into this position. We don't quite understand this relationship.
Laughing with my feet in your lap, like you were my closest friend. How'd we end up on the floor anyway, you say? Your roommate's cheap ass screw top rosé, that's how. I see you every day now.
We don't really know yet what I see you every day now means. We only really come to know that later in the song, I think. Because although she says, I see you every day now, it quickly becomes apparent as the song develops that in fact they don't see each other every day, that there's actually some kind of break that takes place. So when she says, I see you every day now, I think this means in her mind, she sees this person every day. She can't get this person out of their mind.
Top rose, that's how I see you every day now. And I chose you, the one I was dancing with in New York. No shoes, the dark and the sky, and it was the
Let's pause before we get into the section where she runs through the series of red phenomena. First of all, she says, and I chose you, still you, the one I was dancing with in New York. So she brings in a little history here and a little specificity, if you like, into the person's identity. We now know that this is someone that she met or at least danced with in New York. It seems to be that these two people interact at social events, at parties of some kind. And this person was the one she was dancing with in New York with no shoes. I think probably only women would do this. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think women will take their shoes off and dance. Men probably won't. Women usually are wearing high heels in a setting like that, and it's probably much easier to take your shoes off and dance. So it's probably something that women do, but it adds a kind of informality to the occasion and also indicates a certain kind of openness. The removing of an item of clothing, I think, is kind of significant. It's a step towards familiarity and comfort with someone. Then looked up at the sky, and it was, and then we get into this list of colours, which I'll go into in a minute, but looked up at the sky. So where are they? They're outside somewhere. I get the picture of some kind of rooftop party, perhaps in New York, and looking up at the sky. It's a very relaxed scene.
and I chose you, the one I was dancing with in New York. No shoes, the dark and the sky, and it was the burgundy on my t-shirt when you splashed your wine into me, and how the blood rushed into my cheeks so scarlet it was. The mark you saw on my collarbone, the rust that grew between telephones, the lips I used to call home, so scarlet it was.
Just going back a little bit to the I chose you. I chose you for what? It's unclear. She chose to dance with this other person, I guess. But there's a deeper sense here. She chose this other person. But again, there's this ambiguity, uncertainty about this relationship. Chose them for what? And I don't think she knows. And I think that's part of the issue here. She, the narrator, is struggling with understanding the nature of this relationship. But she's aware that at some point, at that point in New York, she chose this other person. And then we go through the string of colour comparisons. The burgundy on my t-shirt when you splashed your wine into me. So perhaps they're holding a glass of wine as they're dancing. Perhaps they're a little tipsy. Some of the wine gets spilt onto the narrator's t-shirt. And it's a stain. And perhaps that's symbolic of the way in which somehow this person has stained her, left a mark upon her. And it's burgundy. Of course, one of the other connotations of that deep red, I suppose, is blood too. But again, there's a sense that these two people are very relaxed together. They're very intimate together. They're having a great time. And how the blood, so the blood is the maroon as well, and how the blood rushed into my cheeks. So she's becoming flushed. Perhaps she's becoming warm from dancing. Perhaps she's becoming embarrassed. Perhaps she's becoming sexually aroused. I think all of this is kind of implied in this, the blood rushing to her cheeks. The mark you saw on my collarbone. It sounds to me as though she's talking about a hickey here. It's interesting that it's on her collarbone. That's really quite low down for a hickey. And it's probably something that wouldn't ordinarily be seen. Perhaps whoever gave her the hickey did it deliberately where it wouldn't be seen to save her embarrassment. But you, the other person, sees this mark. So what does that mean? What is that telling you? The mark you saw on my collarbone. So the other person is aware, I guess, then, of some other intimate relationship that the narrator is involved with. Someone else has made this mark on her collarbone. So there's that complication that comes into this relationship of whatever kind it is. There's someone else involved, because the you in this song didn't make that mark. The rust that grew between telephones. Of course, rust, again, has that reddish colour, but I think the implication here is that when something becomes rusty, it does so through lack of use. But which telephones are we talking about here? Are we talking about the telephones or the communication between the narrator and this other person? Are we talking about the communication between the narrator and whoever made this mark on her collarbone? But somewhere in this situation, communication has broken down. The phone lines have rusted. Then the lips I used to call home, so scarlet it was maroon. Again, whose lips? Is this the lips of the person she's talking to, the lips of the other person? I think perhaps here, perhaps both in the rust between telephones and also in the lips that were so scarlet it was maroon, I think perhaps in this case, it's the other person, it's the you in this relationship that she's talking about. I think. She used to, because she's reflecting back now on this relationship. Still struggling to understand it, I think. But the you has scarlet lip. So here I think it gets quite interesting because although Taylor is being, I think, deliberately ambiguous about the gender of the person that she's addressing in this song, she does give this hint that that other person has scarlet lips. And that's unlikely to apply to a man. It might, but it's less likely than it applying to a woman.
The dark and the sky and it was the burgundy on my t-shirt when you splashed your wine into me and how the blood rushed into my cheeks so scarlet it was. The mark I saw on my collarbone, the rust that grew between telephones, the lips I used to call home, so scarlet it was. Silence came, we were shaking, blind and hazy. How the hell did we lose sight of us again?
When the silence came, we were shaking, blind and hazy. How the hell did we lose sight of us again? So silence came, the communication broke down. And I suspect that a lot of this is down to the difficulty that they're having, or at least that the narrator is having, in trying to define or identify the nature of this relationship. When the silence came, they were both shaken by this. It was painful, and I think they're struggling to know what's going on. How the hell did we lose sight of us again? I think that they're really having trouble identifying this us. Are they good friends? Is there more to this? There seems to be more, at least at times. There's a deeper intimacy to this relationship. And they certainly have this strong connection, dancing together, sitting with her feet in the other person's lap, laughing, joking. They clearly have this connection, but somehow they lose sight of each other. They find it so difficult to define or understand this relationship. And this leads to an awkwardness, a silence between them.
When the silence came, we were shaking, blind and hazy. How the hell did we lose sight of us again? Sobbing with your head in your hands. Ain't that the way shit always ends?
The other person seems to be more deeply affected by this than the narrator. And I think that also becomes clear a little bit later. The other person is sobbing, not just crying, but sobbing. That's a much deeper physical response. And the narrator says, "Ain't that the way shit always ends?" So the narrator is much more resigned to this, or so it seems. This is the way this shit always ends. Seems to suggest she wasn't quite as deeply invested in the relationship or understood the relationship in a different way, and certainly saw it as something that was going to end. She had no expectations that it would last. Just note that I think musically, haven't been paying that much attention to the music, but it becomes apparent when you have breaks in the lyrics that there's really nothing here but synths. Nothing that I can hear anyway but synths.
Sobbing with your head in your hands. Ain't that the way shit always ends? You were standing hollow-eyed in the hallway. Carnations you had thought were roses, that's us.
So again, you were standing hollow-eyed in the hallway. So obviously this other person is taking this really badly. And then there's this beautiful line, "Carnations you had thought were roses, that's us." Roses obviously is normally kind of the language of love. I'm not exactly sure what carnations represent, but the suggestion is that this other person has misunderstood the relationship, at least from the perspective of the narrator. This person thought this was love, that the us was about love. But no, the narrator understood all along that this was carnations, not roses.
Ain't that the way shit always ends? You were standing hollow-eyed in the hallway. Carnations you had thought were roses, that's us. I feel you no matter what. The rubies that I gave up and
But the narrator does add, "I feel you no matter what the rubies that I gave up." So the narrator still has feelings for this person, and that's part of the confusion as well, because I don't think they fully understand their feelings for this person. We lost sight of us. We're acting as though we were best friends. The narrator doesn't understand the relationship. The other person in the story thought they did. They thought they had a clear view of the relationship, but the narrator doesn't. But she still feels for this other person. "I feel you no matter what." That fits in, I think, with the earlier line also, "I see you every day." But she doesn't, in fact. But she feels the other person no matter what the rubies that I gave up. Again, the redness, of course. The narrator is saying that although she doesn't understand this relationship, she gave this other person rubies, which sounds to me like something very valuable. Also a bit sort of blood-like. There's almost like a sharing of blood here. It seems to me, again, a signal of intimacy. There's so much in what the narrator does that signals intimacy. And those were the signals that the other person read in this relationship. But the narrator is unsure, maybe uncomfortable in this relationship. Now we go back and repeat the pre-chorus and the chorus.
you were standing hollow-eyed in the hallway. Carnations you had thought were roses, that's us. I feel you no matter what. The rubies that I gave up and I lost you. The one I was dancing with in New York. No shoes, looked up at the sky and it was Rudy on my t-shirt when it splashed your wine into me and how the blood rushed into my cheeks so scarlet it was. The mark I saw on my collarbone, the rust that grew between telephones, the lips I used to call home, so scarlet it was.
Just before we move on to the brief bridge here, I note that this has changed The words have changed slightly in the chorus here. The mark they saw on my collarbone, not the mark you saw on my collarbone. This to me suggests that she's talking about another mark here. This is a mark that this other person has left now. This is not the mark that you saw. This is the mark that you left on me, and other people are seeing it. Just a very subtle change. It doesn't actually list that change in the lyrics as you find them online here. But when they come up on the screen, it's the mark they saw on my collarbone. Now we move into the short bridge.
Saw on my collarbone, a rust that grew between telephones, the lips I used to call home. So scarlet it was, and awake with your memory over me. That's a real fucking legacy, legacy. And awake with your memory over me. That's a real fucking legacy to leave.
Again, here we are with Taylor Swift with Memory. Memory so important to her. She wakes with your memory over me. This is something that hovers over her. She wakes up thinking about this person. That's the legacy that this person has left with her. There's a pain and also almost a slight sense of anger in the way these lyrics are delivered. Well, that's a real fucking legacy, isn't it? There's that element of anger there. And again, I think this is about the narrator's frustration because she doesn't understand the relationship and she doesn't understand what's happened in the relationship.
And awake with your memory over me. That's a real fucking legacy, legacy. And awake with your memory over me. That's a real fucking legacy to leave. The burgundy on my t-shirt when you splashed your wine into me, and how the blood rushed into my cheeks so scarlet it was. The mark I saw on my collarbone, the rust that grew between telephones, the lips I used to call home so scarlet it was. Maroon. It was maroon.
I find that a fascinating song, and it's one of my favourites off the Midnights album. It's intriguing. Though, as I said, lyrically it's somewhat more repetitious than some of her other songs. I think it's a very rich vein to explore. It's maroon. And in a way, I almost think that's why she chose this colour for this scene, because maroon seems to be such a rich colour. There's so much depth to the colour, and I feel that about this song too. So what do I think is going on in this song, in this relationship? My interpretation of this is likely to be somewhat controversial, and I think probably other people have completely different ideas here. But now, I'm not suggesting that the narrator here is necessarily Taylor Swift. I know that she's perfectly capable of writing a fictitious story to express some ideas. So I'm thinking here not in terms of a relationship that Taylor had necessarily, but in terms of a potential relationship, a possible relationship, a possible situation or scenario that could occur between two people. Let's think about it in those terms without necessarily identifying any of the individuals, even Taylor herself, in this situation. What I think we see here is a really close relationship between two women. Women dance together. Men don't dance together, right? So I think that these two people are friends, close friends. They socialize together. They have a kind of party type relationship. This seems to be where they meet. They meet at dances. They meet at parties in her apartment. But the relationship shifts. It becomes something else. It becomes more intimate. And the narrator of this song is unsure about this. They don't really understand what's happening. They don't necessarily understand their own feelings, or possibly they are not taking this as seriously as the other person is. But the other person falls in love with the narrator. They see this as a love relationship. Whereas the narrator is unable to do that, or is unable to disentangle this from the friendship that she's had with this person. And she's fearful throughout this encounter as it develops, as it changes. She's fearful that she's in fact losing her friend. That's a sense in which she's lost this person. The relationship went into territory that she wasn't particularly comfortable with, or she didn't respond exactly in the same way that the other person did. And now she has a sense of loss because they've lost the friendship. So I think that explains the sense of loss that the person is experiencing, that the narrator is experiencing here, and the sense of anger that they're experiencing. Because a friendship that she had began to develop into something else. Perhaps for her it was playful by and large, but it began to shift and change, and it broke. Silence developed between them. Rust developed between their telephones. The phone lines rusted. And because of that, she lost a friend, a close friend, and that's very painful for her. So that's how I read this song. I love the way that Taylor writes this as the narrator speaking to the listener, you. She doesn't use the third person pronoun except when she refers to they see the mark on my collarbone instead of you see the mark on my collarbone. So at that point, third persons enter into the picture who have perhaps been observing this relationship. They've seen this mark. For the most part, there are just two characters in this song. There's the narrator and there's you, the listener. And of course, by using you rather than a third person pronoun, she's able to leave the identity of you ambiguous, which I think is quite purposeful, but she also does, I think, give some hints, or at least one hint in the song about the gender of that person, and that's in describing the lips of that person as so scarlet they were maroon. Let me know what you think of the song. Let me know what you think of my interpretation.